I've rewound my own pickups before, and a guy named Seymour Duncan, I got pissed at him too. He called me up and said, "Can we use your name for a special pickup?"
About a year ago now, I made a video, the first video I'd ever done that was about guitar gear, regarding the age-old debate on the exact gear that Eddie Van Halen used specifically on the first Van Halen album. The reason I'm making this video in particular is because I made a pretty definitive claim, although I did say that I could be wrong, but I was convinced one of the pickups that Ed was using, in particular the one in the Ibanez Destroyer, was a Duncan Custom. There is in fact a Duncan Custom in this guitar at the moment, and I based that both on some sound clips that were from that Pete Thorne Van Halen pickup comparison video. But I've got to say, for a variety of reasons now, I am not sure that that's actually the case. As a matter of fact, I'm leaning towards it not being the case at all. I'm leaning towards believing that I was just wrong. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The most obvious thing, Seymour Duncan has an advertisement where he lists all the pickups that he made at the time. And in the ad, next to the Duncan Custom is Van Halen. So the first thing was actually something that a person said in the comment section. And that was that if you look at that ad, it could be simply a tonal reference. If you look at the JB, but what does it say next to it? In parentheses, it says harmonics. And when it says that, it's certainly not talking about a band called Harmonics. It's saying essentially this thing has a lot of harmonic content in it, and it's easy to get harmonics out of it, which is true of the JB. And that person made the argument that really all that was really that what he was doing there was just using Van Halen as a reference point for saying, like, if you want that kind of Van Halen style sound, I have a pickup that does that. But I think an even bigger piece of evidence comes when, after hearing that argument and thinking about it for a while, and there were some other reasons I don't even remember now, this is a while ago actually, just so happens that on YouTube, I was listening to a bunch of old interviews with Eddie, and it just so happens that in one of these old interviews from 1979, so right around that same time that ad came out, Eddie seems to address that ad specifically.
There's another guy too. I've rewound my own pickups before, and a guy named Seymour Duncan, you probably know him.
Yeah, I know Seymour.
Yeah, I got pissed at him too. He called me up and said, "Can we use your name for a special pickup?" I said, "No. Next time I pick up Guitar Player magazine, there's a special Van Halen model customized Duncan pickup."
Oh, man.
So I called him up and said, "What the hell's going on?" So he stopped finally.
Well, there you go. He's saying that Duncan just made this pickup without his permission and was trying to capture the Van Halen sound, put out the ad referencing him so that, all the people out there who wanted to get that sound would say, hey, look, in Guitar Player, like this, you can get this pickup. So when I first heard that, I thought, well, that settles it. So he's saying that he didn't use that pickup. But actually, the more I think about it, that isn't necessarily true. Just because, so we know that, Seymour did rewind one of his PAFs for him. The question is, does that mean that Eddie never used that pickup? To where when he came to him saying, I want to do this special Van Halen pickup, was that special Van Halen pickup something that Seymour had just created and thought Eddie would like and thought captured his sound? Or was it something that Eddie had used and maybe even created specifically for Eddie, and that Duncan decided to simply just, put that pickup on the market. And those are two very different things. So it's hard to say what it was, but there's another option that I want to throw into the ring here. It occurs to me now that, clearly at one point or another, Eddie did use the super distortion in some context or another. He talks about in that same video putting a PAF magnet in it and stuff like that. And another interesting option is that if you look at the specs for the super distortion and the Duncan Custom, they are both like 14K-ish pickups with ceramic magnets. And so, an argument can be made that perhaps Seymour was aware of the fact that Eddie had used a super distortion in some context or another, and maybe Seymour got his hands on one of Ed's pickups. Maybe he did some work for him with that, and it just so happened that he saw that he used the super distortion and then maybe made some kind of modifications to it. So I also wonder if the Duncan Custom is in a strange way, and it could be like an acknowledgement that Eddie did use a super distortion simply because the specs are so similar. At the same time, Ed also says that he doesn't like distortion style pickups, as I referenced in the last video, and that he I think he kind of shits on DiMarzio. I think he says that they're like cheaply made or something. And the implication is that he put the other magnet, the Alnico 2, in just so he could get it to sound more like he liked. And then obviously, if the Duncan Custom is very similar to the super distortion, and Eddie's also talking about putting an Alnico 2 magnet into Duncan Custom, that actually is just the Duncan Custom, which is the same pickup with an Alnico 2 magnet. So is that actually just like Seymour just taking the fact that Eddie used a super distortion in theory and then put a PAF magnet in it, and that was like one of his main pickups? Did he just create the custom as a nod to that? Like, it's really hard to say, but I will say I do think it's important to say that I've had the super distortion in that guitar actually, and the Duncan Custom in that same guitar. And although the specs are very similar, and they do share some commonalities, they do, I haven't A-B'd them directly, but they actually do feel to me like rather different pickups in many regards. I feel like the Duncan Custom is, I think it's brighter and like tighter sounding, as to where I think the super distortion, it's a little like juicier sounding. There's a little, the high end's a little fatter sounding. But I don't know. It's been a while since I did that, so I don't know the degree to which other factors come into the way a pickup sounds. Clearly they do come into that, but I think it'd be silly to not recognize the similarities there. And given the, I think there's a very obvious, although unspoken, tension between Seymour Duncan and DiMarzio that goes, that I'm sure goes way back. And, nobody says it, but you can just kind of like feel it if the subject of DiMarzio comes up. And so in all likelihood, I think they've both been like kind of ripping each other off for for some time now, and if I'm not mistaken, I think DiMarzio just basically came out with their own version of the 59, of the Seymour Duncan 59. And it says in the ad that it's, it's a recreation of, Larry DiMarzio's pickup from his 1959 Les Paul. And yet it's like the same DC resistance, and it has an Alnico 5 magnet in it, which is something that's used in the Seymour Duncan 59, but sure as hell was not used in Les Pauls back in the day. Those were Alnico 2 magnets. Maybe some Alnico 5s got in there at some point, but I'm not even aware of that. Regardless. So that's like another thing to chew on. But there's one last thing that I'd like to consider in this. And that's that a lot of people have said that the stock pickups, the Alnico 8 pickups that come stock in the Ibanez Destroyer, that those were still in the guitar when he recorded that. Now, I remember the first time while watching that video, I actually remember thinking that when Pete used the Destroyer with the stock pickups, before Pete commented on it, I remember thinking, like, that's actually pretty close. And then after Pete's done playing, he says that, like, he doesn't hear it, and then it's much more that he thinks it's much closer to the Super Distortion. Now, it's definitely like a brighter sound, and it's got a little more of like hollowness to it compared to the Super Distortion. But I actually think that the difference in the sound could very well come down to like the speakers and the EQ and all that kind of stuff. I think there's a very good case to be made that that it actually is those stock pickups that's in it. So really I think all that this has done, and now in this video, is just sort of like create more elements and then more potential doubts about, what it is and isn't, and, much more human knowledge and time will be spent still trying to figure out exactly what was going on there. Here's some clips of me playing some with these pickups. Okay, if there's any kind of appetite for me to do more videos like this, it's something I could see doing more of. This is not going to become a guitar channel because I have a lot of other interests, but I could definitely see it being something that I incorporate in wherever it seems relevant. And regardless of why you're here, it'd be great to hear your thoughts. It's always appreciated to like and ultimately to subscribe and all of that good stuff. But if you've gotten to this far into the video, as I generally say, that actually means more to me than either one of those things. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys later, hopefully.